Hello and welcome to the Stepparenting Network. It's your host, Selena Shine. And on today's episode, I want to start with something that I think about a lot, that a lot of people in blended families carry around, but never actually say out loud. And it's this: the silence. Not the comfortable kind of silence, not the peaceful, everything is fine kind. I'm talking about the kind of silence that you choose deliberately, repeatedly, because you convinced yourself that saying something would just make everything worse and that your feelings are an inconvenience. That the complexity of the situation is already at a 10 and you're adding your voice to it just to push it to an 11. And so you say nothing and then you say nothing again. And after a while, saying nothing becomes the default. It becomes the thing you do automatically, almost without thinking. Because somewhere along the line, you decided that keeping the peace was more important than telling the truth about how you actually feel. I want to talk about that today because I think it's one of the most quietly damaging things that happens to step parents and specifically stepmoms. And nobody really names it for what it is. It's not maturity, it's not patience, it's not you becoming or being the bigger person. It's self abandonment dressed up as keeping the peace. And there's a difference. So let's talk about that. Here's what I've noticed: when you step into a blended family, there's this unspoken code that gets handed out to you without anyone actually handing it to you. And the code is basically you're the newcomer, you're the one who chose this. The children were there first, the history was here first, the complexity was here first. And your job is to integrate, to adjust, to become understanding, to be patient, and to be flexible. And most stepmoms take that code seriously, really seriously, because they care, because they understand the fragility of what they've just walked into, because they don't want to be the reason something breaks. And so they absorb things, they let things slide. They have feelings, real, legitimate feelings, and they tuck them away because the timing never feels right. And the issue feels too small to bring up, or they're worried about how it'll come across. And from the outside, it looks like grace, it looks like maturity. But on the inside, it's exhausting, it's isolating. And after long enough, it becomes or starts to feel like nobody really sees you. Like you're just this quiet, accommodating presence in a family that was never really about you. And the worst part is you start to believe that. You start to believe that your voice actually doesn't belong in the room, and that speaking up is the same as complaining, that advocating for yourself is the same as making things harder for everyone. And I want to sit with that for a second because I think that belief that your voice is a burden doesn't just show up out of nowhere. A lot of us were raised with a very specific message about what it means to speak up. And that message was don't. Not in those words necessarily, but in the culture, in the households, and in the way that adults around us operated. Be seen and not be heard. Don't talk when grown folks are talking. Don't voice your opinions unless someone asks. Don't make a fuss. Don't be difficult. Don't be too much. And we absorb that, all of that. We absorbed it so deeply that we didn't even realize it became the blueprints for how we move through the world as adults. So, when we find ourselves in a situation like a blended family, where speaking up feels risky, where the stakes feel high, and where you're already operating from a place of wanting to be accepted and not to rock the boat, all of that old conditioning just kicks back in. Be quiet, adjust, don't make it about you. And I think for a lot of stepmoms, the silence isn't just about the current situation. It's layered, it's old, it's tied to this deep ingrained feeling and belief that your feelings are secondary, that your needs are inconvenient, that the most loving thing you can do is just not to say anything. But here's what I want to offer. Part of breaking generational cycles, and I mean really breaking them, It's not just about being aware of them, it's learning to do the thing that you were taught never to do. Speak up for yourself with grace, without apology. Not because you're making it about you, but because your voice is legitimate part of this story. That's not complaining, and that's certainly not adding complexity. That is self advocacy, and it matters more than I think we give it credit for. Now, I want to be real about something because I think this is where it gets nuanced, and I don't want to gloss over it. Advocating for yourself in a blended family is not the same as advocating for yourself in a regular relationship. The dynamics are different. There are children involved. There are emotions that run really deep. And there is this history that you are not a part of, but you are now adjacent to in a very significant way. So I'm not sitting here saying just say everything you feel whenever you feel it. That's not what this is. What I'm saying is that there is an art to this, the art of something worth actually learning. Because the goal isn't to dump every feeling on the table and let it land wherever it lands. The goal is to communicate in a way that is honest, that is clear, and that doesn't blow up the room. And that's actually a skill. And most of us were never taught this because we were too busy being told not to speak at all. So, what does that actually look like? I think it starts with knowing the difference between reacting and communicating, because those are not the same thing. Reacting is what happens when you've been holding something in for 6 weeks and it finally comes out loudly and messily with a lot of extra emotions attached that have nothing to do with the specific thing you're talking about. And it makes sense that it happens that way. When you've been silent for too long, when something finally breaks the surface, it brings everything with it. But that kind of release, while it makes total sense, rarely lands the way you need it to. It can feel like an attack even when it isn't. It can feel like an overreaction even when it's completely valid. It can create more distance instead of the closeness and understanding that you are actually looking for. Communicating is different. Communicating is choosing to say something before it reaches a boiling point. It's deciding that your feelings deserve to be addressed while they're still manageable. It's coming to a conversation not to unload, but to be understood. And I know that sounds simple, but for someone who was raised to stay quiet, who has been operating in a blended family with that constant background hum of don't add to the complexity, choosing to communicate before you reach your limit is genuinely countercultural. It goes against everything your nervous system has been trained to do, but it is possible and it is necessary. And with practice, it becomes the thing that saves you. Let me tell you what silence actually costs. Because I think sometimes we focus so much on what speaking up cost us that we don't really look honestly at what staying quiet is already taken away. Silence over time creates resentment, not because you're a resentful person, but because unacknowledged needs don't just disappear, they accumulate. They build up quietly in a background until you're walking around with this invisible weight that no one else can see and that you can't even fully name anymore. Silence creates distance in your relationship, especially because you stop sharing what's actually going on with you, not the surface stuff, but the real stuff. Your partner loses access to you. And I don't think that most people realize how much that erodes connection over time, slowly. Silence creates confusion because your partner cannot read your mind. And when you're walking around visibly tired or withdrawn or short tempered and nobody knows why, you haven't said anything, it creates that tension in the house that everyone feels but no one can address because the source of it hasn't been named. And here's the one that I think hits the deepest. Silence teaches your children, including your stepchildren, that that's what adults do. That when something is hard, you carry it quietly. that when you're struggling, you figure it out alone, that your feelings are something to manage privately and not something to bring into a relationship with the people who love you. And if breaking generational cycles is something you actually care about, if you genuinely want the next generation to move differently than we did, then the way we handle our own voice is one of the most powerful things you can model for them. Children are watching, not just what you say to them, but how you exist, how you handle difficulty. Whether the adults in your life show them that it's okay to have needs, to name them, and to ask for help. When you stay silent to protect them from complexity, you're actually teaching them something about complexity. And what you're teaching them is when it's hard, don't say so. I want to talk about communicating with grace because I think that phrase gets misunderstood sometimes. Grace in communication doesn't mean soft peddling everything. It doesn't mean wrapping your truth in so much cushioning that the actual points get lost. It doesn't mean being so careful about how you say something that you end up not really saying it at all. Grace means being honest without being brutal. It means you're choosing your timing thoughtfully. It means you're coming into a conversation with the intention of being understood, not just heard. It sounds like I've been carrying something and I want to share it with you, not to create an argument, but because I need you to know what's going on with me. It sounds like I'm not saying this to add pressure. I'm saying this because I think if I don't, I'm going to start pulling away, and I don't want that. It sounds like something happened and it hurt me. And I want to talk about it because the alternative is me sitting with it alone. And that's not working anymore. That's grace. That's not complaining and that's not making things harder. That's actually two adults in a partnership being honest with each other, which, when you think about it, is literally the foundation of everything working. And I think sometimes stepmoms specifically, there's this extra layer of fear around communicating with your partner because the partner is the bridge. The partner is the person that exists in both worlds, the world of this new relationship and the world of the children and their history and the co parenting dynamic. And saying, I'm struggling to that person can feel like you're asking them to choose, like you're creating this conflict that didn't exist before. But here's the thing, that conflict already exists. It's just inside of you, invisible, building up. The conversation doesn't create the problem, it names it. And naming something is the first step towards actually addressing it. Your partner cannot show up for something they don't know is happening. And I also want to talk about advocating for yourself in spaces beyond your relationship because self advocacy as a stepmom is bigger than just one conversation with your partner. It's knowing when to say no to something that doesn't feel right, even if you can't perfectly articulate why. It's asking for help without prefacing it with, I know this is a lot, or I'm sorry for even bringing this up. It's telling your therapist the real version of what's going on, not just the edited one. And it's being honest with your friendships about what this role actually cost you instead of performing the version of it that seems more acceptable. It's recognizing that your needs, emotional, mental, physical, are not optional extras. They're not the things that you get to once you've taken care of everyone else. They're requirements. And advocating for them is not selfishness. It's the most basic form of self respect. And I think this is where the generational piece comes back in because a lot of us watched the woman who raised us pour everything into everyone around them and ask for nothing in return. And we were taught that that was love. That was what a good woman does. You give and you sacrifice. You carry and you don't complain. And there was real love in that. I don't want to dismiss that. But there was also a cost. And a lot of us watch the cost collect in the bodies and the moods and the quiet exhaustion of these women around us. and we vowed, consciously or not, that we were going to do things differently, that we were going to be more open, more expressive, more willing to ask for what we needed. And then we got into a blended family, and all of that went right out the window because the stakes felt too high, because the complexity felt too fragile, because we didn't want to be difficult. So we became our mothers, we became our grandmothers, not because we wanted to, but because nobody taught us what the alternative actually looks like in practice. The alternative is self advocacy. It's not loud, it's not extreme, it's not making everything about you. It's just this quiet, consistent practice of acknowledging that you exist, that you have a perspective, that your experience in this family is valid and worth naming. If you've been struggling in silence, and I mean really struggling, carrying things you haven't said to anyone, I want you to start small. You don't have to have this big conversation today, and you don't have to walk in and lay everything out all at once. That can actually be overwhelming for everyone, including you. Start with one thing, one specific thing that you've been holding that you need your partner to know. Not everything, just one thing, and say it. Not at the end of a hard day when you're both depleted or in the middle of something else. Choose a moment and say that thing and see what happens. Because most of the time, what you're going to find is that that conversation you've been dreading, the one you've been convinced will make everything harder, actually brings you closer. Because it makes you real to your partner in a way that your silence couldn't. Your voice in this relationship is not a liability. It's a necessary part of what makes the relationship real. And for the children watching, biological or step, your willingness to speak up, to advocate for yourself, to model what it looks like to have a need and name it without the world ending. That is one of the most powerful things you can give them. Not the perfect stepmom, not the one who never struggles or never needs anything, the one who showed them that your feelings are worth saying out loud, that asking for help is not weakness, that the people who love you can actually handle the truth. That's the cycle that breaks, not all at once, but just one conversation at a time. And it starts with you deciding that your voice is worth using because it is. It really is. I love chatting with you. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a comment, leave a like, and join our community. I'll see you in the next one.